Hi, welcome to the very first day of Simple and Speedy Program Evaluation, where we're going to determine your specific needs based on what your organization does, who you serve, and how you want to see their lives change or the world change as a result of the work you do. So I'm going to go through a little bit of a presentation just to refresh your memory or introduce you to the concepts that we're going to be talking about. And then I'm going to give you a tool that you can use to put your own specific evaluation metrics together. And then you'll go ahead and do that, and that will be your homework for this part of the session. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in and get into how you can determine your specific needs. First, we're going to start with who you serve. The people that you serve we'll call stakeholders in this process. Stakeholders in general can be anybody that your organization interacts with. So usually a bunch of really common stakeholder groups would be your beneficiaries, and those are the people we'll focus on in evaluation, of course. But it also could include your board members or your staff or anyone else that you touch with your work or your services. For the purposes of program evaluation, obviously it makes sense for us to only talk about your beneficiaries. But I also think that you can take some of the processes we're going to be using in the program evaluation session, or process development rather, and use them for other stakeholder groups down the road if you're so inclined. So for instance, if you want to see whether your staff is satisfied, or you want to define what a healthy organization looks like from the inside, you could also adopt these kinds of same practices and processes for your board and staff as well. So I actually really do recommend that you think about that. But for now, we are just going to talk about your beneficiaries. So when I talk about stakeholders for the whole rest of program evaluation, simple and speedy program evaluation, I'm only talking about the people that your organization serves. Then we'll identify problems. So in identifying the problems, what you want to do is either ask your stakeholders, observe your stakeholders, or notice them and see what issues are arising for them. This can be found in research if you read different research papers, or it can be found in demographics information, or it can be found just from your own client base. So you generally probably do know what the problems are that your people face, but this is an opportunity for you to truly define them and to get really specific. If you don't already have language that comes to mind about what problems your stakeholders face, you can do a couple different things. One thing is, if you have any grants that you've written, I bet that you have some needs data in there. So it would be a good place for you to start if you're interested to kind of get some of the language of how you talk about the problems of the people you serve. You could go ahead and look at some of your grants. Or if you don't have any grants, or if your grants aren't providing what you need, you could also do a process with some people in your organization. So whether you want to get together some of your actual stakeholders, or if you want to do this just with staff, it's up to you depending on your time constraints, but I do recommend including your actual stakeholders in the process as much as you can. There's a process I like to call blizzarding, and it's where you take a bunch of Post-it notes in whatever color, and you have people brainstorm what problems their stakeholders face. And so if you're trying to do this, it would be best to work with people who work directly with your clients. So like your line staff would be a great source for this information. And as much as possible, again, from your actual stakeholders themselves, because their language is powerful. And if you can use their language, that's best. So identifying problems, if you don't know what the problems are, check out your grants or do a quick brainstorming process using the Post-it notes that I mentioned, because if you use those, it's really nice because you can put them up on the wall, and then you can kind of mix and match them and put them into categories and things like that. So it's a really quick, easy way for you to get a sense of what issues your stakeholders are facing. Typically, there are 4 different categories of problems. This is the same motivation that causes people to change or to buy something. And in your case, it's motivation for you to help solve issues that are happening to people. So the first is financial. And financial, of course, has to do with, what's your financial situation. So do you have enough money in the bank, or what's your percent of area median income, or other traditional kinds of metrics like that. And then we have emotional. Now, emotional, for a lot of nonprofits, it's not going to come into play, but if you do any work with mental health, it will. And so you want to think about it. Even if you don't think you do emotional work, it is likely that you do touch on it somewhere. So when you're looking at your problems, think about, what do clients feel? What kinds of challenges do they have around how they feel? So even if you do focus primarily on like financial well-being, for instance, you still have an emotional component to that. So you might talk about clients' emotional relationship with money, or you might talk about how clients feel about their socioeconomic status, or so forth. And then we have physical. Physical has to do with health, of course, but it also has to do with your physical situation. So whether you have a roof over your head or not, this could also have to do with disabilities and other things that have to do with the well-being of your body. And then spiritual. And again, this is one that not all organizations are going to totally touch on, but if you do, this is a really good category to think about. And even if you don't normally deal with spiritual health, I think it is really important to think about the whole person and all of the different problems that they might have. And so I do encourage you to dig a little deeper and see if you do have some spiritual problems that you actually do address. And this doesn't have anything to do with religion necessarily, but it is a reality that people have sort of this esoteric other thing sometimes that they need to have addressed. So think about financial, emotional, physical, and spiritual problems. And then solutions. When we talk about solutions, all we're doing is completely rephrasing the problem in the opposite. So we're just going to flip it on its head, and we're going to name a future state that we would prefer to the problem that we have. So if I were to list a problem as my clients don't have enough money at the end of the month to save, then the problem flipped on its head would be my clients have plenty of money to save at the end of the month. So it's really just taking that problem and rephrasing it as a solution. And this is something that's actually useful for grant writing too, because it's something that you can take, and even though it seems stupid to do it right in a row, like I just said this problem, now I have to say the opposite thing, that seems a little silly, but it's actually not silly, because you can actually look at your solutions and see ultimately kind of what your vision is and how your program is servicing that vision. So as you do it, it'll feel kind of funny, but it does kind of shortcut you to declaring what the future state would be, or your new reality would be, once your interventions take root and change people's lives in the world. And now we're going to define your activities. So the activities are what you do. How, this is where we get into beyond just who you serve and what their problems are, but what is it that you actually provide for them? What are your interventions? You provide workshops, or you provide individual counseling, or you provide legislative advocacy, or whatever it might be. You have a list of things that you do. So related directly to those different problems, you may have activities that fit with them. Now, some of your activities are going to service multiple problems, and that's totally okay. I'm going to show you how to figure that out in the tool when we get there. So for now, let's just say what do you do, your interventions, and then we'll list out your activities as we go. Now, I do want to say that as you're doing as you're using this tool, I want you to think about your activities in the confines of individual programs based on your specific stakeholder group. And then we have depth of social change. So the depth of social change goes from the top to the bottom, with the top issue being of the least social impact and the bottom being highest impact. That doesn't mean that one is better than the other, but it just means that you're likely to get more significant outcomes and impacts from the items that are lower on that list rather than the things that are at the top of that list. That doesn't mean that the things at the top of the list aren't important. You should still do them, and many organizations do those things. So as you're going through and identifying your activities, we'll map each of those activities to a specific depth of social change that's represented by that offering. Part of why I have you do this is partly because I think it's important for you to know how deep you're going into social change, but also so that you can take that information and sort of shortcut your way into metrics. And I'll talk a little bit about that when we get into that. So we're going to talk about outcomes after that. Individual level change. So this is for each individual that comes through your program, what kind of change would you like to see for them? And then metrics for that outcome. So specifically, how will you know that change has occurred? When we're talking about metrics in this framework, I'm using metrics in a pretty broad sense. So it depends on where you're going for like program evaluation or where you read about it. Sometimes metrics are a singular thing that can be measured. That's really true. In the case of my stuff, I've chosen the word metric to mean how you know change has occurred, but we also sometimes have to drill down further from a metric in order to kind of get to the point where we know change has occurred. So the further drilling down for metrics would be definition, understanding that if needed, you can further clarify what your metric means. So, for instance, if you had a metric that said, X percent of people that come through our program report a high level of confidence after they complete it, then you want to further define that metric because the word confidence is a subjective word. So if you find yourself saying a metric that has a subjective word in it, you're going to want to define what exactly you mean by that subjective word. So for confidence, we would say these people indicated a 5. Let's say we had given them a survey. So in our survey of whatever name it is, there were 6 questions that related to confidence. And those questions were answered with a high or very high, level of confidence for these people. That's what definition means. So this is confidence means, these different things that were represented in these questions, which are indicators. So the indicators are questions or data that roll up into the metric. So let me step back for one more second and say, okay, so we've said that our metric is that 80% of people are more confident now that they've taken our class. Confident means that they've answered 4 or 5 or high or very high on our confidence scale. And then the confidence scale is what then described further in the indicator. So a question like, I feel like I can talk to anybody in the room when I walk into the room. You scored on a 1, 2, 3, or 4 or 5. So anyone that says 4 or 5 is highly confident. Another way that we could measure confidence would be, I feel like my opinion is important and it's fine for me to speak up when I'm in a room of my peers. And then you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, they said 4 or 5. That means they're highly confident. So that's what I mean. So metric is confidence in this case. The definition is by confidence, we mean people who scored who rated themselves at a high or very high level of confidence in our survey. The indicator are the questions that we ask to get to whether people are confident or not. And then there's one more, and I apologize, I don't remember why I didn't have it in my slideshow, but it's impact. And we'll get to that in the spreadsheet that I created for your planning tool. Impact is much like outcomes, but it is the roll-up of all of your outcomes into your global level change or community level change. So this is where you get into the bigger impact stuff that, look, I'm using the word impact to describe impacts. That's not helpful. To get into the higher level work that allows you to see change across communities and across multiple cohorts of your beneficiaries.